feel like everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
100%. Why is this important? Why are we even going here? He's helped a lot of guys. He's also not had success with a lot of guys.
Come in with a purpose, and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it.
From the majors to the sandlot, baseball and softball share space in one place. Welcome to the farm system.
All righty. Fellas, and ladies, welcome back to another episode of The Farm. We are back. Tanky's back in his sweater. Got his Christmas vibes still going. Say hello to the people, Tanky. Say what's up. There he is, back in action. If you don't watch the video version of the podcast, I don't really know what you're doing, because if you don't want to look at Tank literally be in a Christmas sweater, I don't know like what you're actually watching the podcast for. Like, I'm literally here doing the podcast so I can watch Tank be in the Christmas sweater.
The crop top now.
yeah, that boy getting thicker. That boy getting smooth. He been on the Steve strength program. That boy getting chest on him.
Shout out Steve.
Shout out to Scuba Steve. All right, Code. What are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about hitting baseballs today.
No way.
We're trying.
Why would we want to talk about hitting baseballs, man? Come on, you act like we like that or something.
Yeah, we were just talking about like the importance of like coordination of strength and coordination of patterns, and like how long it takes to build that pattern and have the CNS recognize that as your dominant pattern, and also too like we were just like finished up, before camera talking about like it's not always going to be what you think it is. Like, yeah, that's a more dominant pattern, but also too, like it can also one day not be, the pattern that day. And how to work through that process, which, we did one of those last week.
Well, and I think that's the big thing we've actually talked about, and I know one day we're going to do it, Cody, is a skill acquisition course. Because a large part of skill acquisition, obviously, like, yes, you have the physical components of like what the body and your like muscles, what they're capable, the force they're able to produce, and like all of that, right? But let's say you go like teaching somebody to optimize their kinematic sequence, right? Like, well, the kinematic sequence is a CNS, and I'm gonna do my best, because this is, catch me when I do it, Cody, because I usually say CNS system. The S in CNS stands for system. Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna make sure my brain doesn't try to do that. All right. Help me out. But all the time too with like CNS is just understanding when we're talking about like sequencing and all that stuff, and also too not to be confused, that to optimize your kinematic sequence, which again, if you're not aware, let me get the basics out of the way. Kinematic sequence, right, is the true definition of, let me go back all the way to biomechanics 1 right now. Shout out to our first course.
Shameless plugs.
Shout out. Is there's a difference between kinetics and kinematics, and a lot of times they get used interchangeably, but those are different things, right? So, for example, kinematics, right, are more about the angles, speed, orientation, like through space and all those things as well. Where kinetics, let me look up the exact definition of, I want to share with everybody. I'm going back to biomechanics level 1 here, because people a lot of times will use these words interchangeably, and I don't want to mess up the exact definitions here. So kinetics is the branch of chemistry or biochemistry concerned with measuring and studying the rates of reactions, right? And then from a physics standpoint is the study of forces acting on a mechanism. So the actual forces. And then kinematics, right, is like you got like cause and effect, basically. That's how I explain it in biomechanics level 1, is kinetics are what are the forces that are causing those things to happen. And then kinematics are what's actually moving as the result of those forces being created, right? And so that's obviously very big, where, for example, let's say we're measuring force plate data, right? We're measuring the forces that are at plays, the kinetics, right? But the kinematics would be the result of what the body is then therefore doing because of those forces. Now, you also have a lot more forces going on just because they're being measured at the floor.
Right.
Doesn't mean, right, that the forces aren't happening internally, like what's going on in the middle of my part of my body, which is then creating forces down and up. For example, if I just measure what the bat is doing at the very end of the movement, it doesn't mean that there wasn't force happening prior to that, right? So the same thing with the ground force, right? So One thing just to clarify there is the difference between those two. Now, also too, for example, me and you could have the exact same, let's say if we just go, this isn't true, but let's just call all things being equal. We could have the exact same structure, identical, right? This isn't true, but let's say, and also for me and Cody, definitely not true.
Yeah, a lot of
Very
coaches
different
would
body
say,
types.
"Oh, you guys are both 5'10", and
Yes.
you know,
Oh, thank you. I was
right?
grateful
So
for the
you guys are
5'10".
the same
Thank
player.
Thank you,
know,
Cody.
Well,
that was
you
very
know,
gracious.
With shoes
I
on,
appreciate you.
know,
Thank you.
So
But maybe with the a little extra.
you got the Air Maxes on,
5'9"
but
and a half on a
but
good
yeah,
day.
you see,
Same.
you know, similar looking human,
Yes.
height wise, maybe not like width wise, but
Yeah.
same position. And it's like,
Yeah.
this is, you need to hit ground balls to second base, steal bases, play good defense, which, as everybody that's followed us for a long time, was not necessarily how you played at all. But again, you know,
people saw me as this like scrappy,
yeah,
which I was scrappy, but
like
again,
mentality.
like the mentality, but like defensively, I had pretty good hands. My feet weren't great.
right.
I was more of a power guy, right? Even though I was small, I had a lot of power, right? Which is a lot of people think, okay, smaller stature, all those other things. But if you look at like my body type wise, and like, you know, Cody's trying to get a raise today. He said when he said width wise, he gave me the muscle symbol.
You get a little
You're listening
little
online,
tank in your
but
shoulders.
also too, just from a structure, like it's very easy for me to gain weight. Both ways. Like if I'm trying to get really strong, or also too, your boy ain't eating well, like I could also gain weight that way as well, right? When I was younger, again, it was a little bit different too, but also, and it's not just an age thing, it has to do with structure. Like, again, some guys have broader shoulders. Some guys have, again, we talked about this as well. Like you look at like, you know, ISAs, or again, like more of like your rib cage or shoulders, you know, shoulders and all those things and how those go into, and then like your pelvis width, right? We've seen guys with really wide shoulders and a really thin waist, right? Or there's guys that are built like a fridge, right? Where they're really wide waist, really wide shoulders, or guys that have really narrow shoulders, really wide waist, right? And all these variances, obviously in between all of those and everything in between. So like the structure of with that within like bones, anatomy, all that other stuff. And then also too, as well, obviously, musculature and all those things genetically and all those things. There's guys that hardly work out and are huge, jacked. And there's guys that work out every single day. And like, again, they're not as, or for example, there's guys around the country where this is a real thing where they genetically have more like sprinter legs. Like for example, like Jarrell, right? Like Jarrell he again ran track when he was young, all those other things, but like he has sprinter legs. Like his body was built to sprint. So he has a really hard time gaining mass in his legs, even though he trains crazy amount of hours. Whereas like for me, I can gain mass in my legs really easy. We have different body types, right? We have different body. And again, he also puts a lot of mass on in his upper body really easily, where other guys really struggle on that side of things, but they can get their legs really big or whatever, right? Like, so there's all these genetic predisposed, and also too, then you know, nature versus nurture, you know, all the things that, you're born with and all the things you develop, right? And all those things like in between. But let's say with all that context, let's say me and you have the exact same structure, right? Same, you know, if we were both narrow guys, right? Like both narrow shoulder, narrow pelvis guys, grew up doing the same things, generally had pretty similar body, you know, no injury history. Let's call all things being equal. Even if all of that was true, right? Which it's not with anybody, right? But even if all of that is true, how I utilize that structure, right? You got hardware. Think of it like a computer. You have hardware and then you have software. Software is how I'm utilizing the hardware. Or think of it like a gaming console. We might have a PS5, but I can put different games in and play different games on that PS5. You get what I'm saying? You know, this could be NBA 2K. You know what I'm saying? Or we could be playing Madden, or we could be playing GTA or whatever, right? Like, or Call of Duty. They all play on the same console, right? But they're all different games, right? And different software, right? That could be running and be utilized in different ways. So while we are not computers and none of us have the exact same parts and hardware, we also need to know that there's a whole other side of this, which is software and how I utilize that hardware and how that force that I can even create, how it could even be expressed very differently. And then to get us into the topic, now that I got all that context out of the way, to get us into the topic is how undervalued and how little we know. Do we know a lot more than we used to when it comes to the CNS? Dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
But we are still scratching the surface on what we can even, you got to think about this, right? You got all of these basically, when you talk about your nerves and all this stuff, a whole bunch of little wires running all over your body, right? If you've ever seen a graphic, insert now, right? Insert now, our editor, Cody, right? Insert now an image of just the nerves running through our body, just all these wires running throughout our body that's controlled by our central nervous system, right? So you have your brain, right? You got your spine, all your central nervous system, right? All of those things going in and down your spine, and then all these wires that go out from that, right? That run into, and again, I'm using the word wires, obviously, you can make the analogy, right? Is that you have all these wires running everywhere, and then as I grow, as I get older, as I become more coordinated, I learn what to fire and when. Like you start seeing babies, they start realizing like, okay, they can close their hands, right? Oh, but I can close my hands, but I can't do just my index finger.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do, I can't do, one finger at a time. I can only do everything closed or everything open. And then you have to coordinate how each one of those muscles and actually being able to do all that. A lot of us right now, for example, if you don't remember that and you haven't had a baby in your life in a minute, take your shoe off. Can you move each toe individually? Can you do all these other things? A lot of people can't because they haven't coordinated that. Or again, they spend a lot of time in shoes and all their feet are like pressed together, right? Like all of those things. And like coordination obviously is seen dramatically in some different ways. And a lot of times we talk about coordination, which is like hand-eye coordination, some of these other things. But like as an athlete, and it also too, I think it's a very watered down term where we're like, like coordination. But coordination's a much bigger concept than the surface level usage that we use all the time. And it largely has to do with CNS. And so what brought us to this is I wanted you to kind of open up from coaching and some of the things that you notice from, we talk about intention or what someone's trying to do and some of that stuff, like what kind of like brought us to some of this topic too, is like a coaching standpoint.
Yeah. So I feel like probably the last couple months, a really big overarching umbrella thought that I've had is how important the hitter's perception or understanding of what they're trying to do makes on their actual move, right? And so it was multiple occasions, but one that's just off the top of my head is in hitting, and we have these terms like get the barrel to turn, decel, pimping it, hold the finish, all these different like random terms like your entry, extension, disassociation, association, connected, like all these terms. And as you get our groups that come in later in the day, we have a lot of little guys. We also have some softball girls and some like high school baseball guys that come in. And in my opinion, some of the bigger progress we've made has come from actually talking to them about what these terms mean and trying to understand what they think it means to them.
Yeah.
So a very general one was with the hitter, and I was like, well, I want you to stay in your backside a little bit longer. They do a swing, and I'm like, that's not it. Like in my eyes tell me that's not it, right? So then it just made me think, okay, what does getting in your backside mean to you? And then they showed me, and they shifted everything back, didn't coil, swivel, didn't create any type of like rotation, literally just shifted back over their backside and stacked. And I was like, that's the disconnect, right? Super basic one. There's a lot more like in-depth conversations with multiple different hitters, but that was a really simple one that I was like, this is important because if I'm telling you to get into your backside, you're
Mhm.
doing what I'm asking you to do,
Yep.
but based on your understanding and interpretation
Yep.
of what getting in your backside is
Yeah.
to you.
Or
Right,
or
which
or
can see
perfect
it different.
example I wanted you to share too is like from the other day with Sid, and we're talking about
Yeah.
pimping, right?
Yeah, right. Is so got a softball girl in here, hitting with her, and we're talking about like pimping the finish, right? And not a very common thing in my
softball.
experience in softball to talk about is
Yeah.
pimping the finish,
Even
right?
baseball,
Make
but
it look
definitely not
sexy.
in
Like there,
softball.
yeah, I mean, there's some guys I feel like are more, you know, will kind of just do it without their
Yeah, yeah.
coaches, you know, permission or
showy.
guide. Yeah, right.
Guys
It's like
much
they
more
want to
showy.
flaunt. Whereas like our softball girls are very literal at times. I'm like, hold your finish, and like they'll do something crazy, or I'll be like, you know, do this, and it's like take it so literal. Where the guys are, you know, a little more flamboyant with their
There you go.
interpretations. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
but yeah, we're talking about pimping the finish, and it was obviously there was a little disconnect for her
Mhm.
because what we were trying to get her to do and what she was doing didn't really match up.
Mhm.
And it was, we know what pimping the finish looks and feels like,
Mhm.
but she didn't.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
she thought she did. She was like, what is like, and then asked me later, is like, so pimping the finish, like, I don't know exactly what you guys mean by that. And I'm like,
Mhm.
you know, when someone hits a ball and it like kind of looks lazy almost and like effortless at the finish, like
Mhm.
they could stand there all day and it doesn't look very like high effort. You know, I was trying to explain it and I thought it was just kind of
Yeah.
funny because I
Even
was like,
trying to explain
you
it
know,
is
I
tough.
was just like, I could see it in my
Yeah.
head. I'm like, Griffey, I'm like, okay, someone just hit a walk-off bomb, you know, and like they're not even out of the box and they're already flexing, like it's gone, you know.
Mhm.
And I'm like trying to explain it to her, and I'm like, well, that makes a lot of sense why she couldn't pimp the finish, even if
Yeah.
she's physically capable. Which there is some stuff how she was moving, which
Yeah,
is why
yeah.
she couldn't.
Why would she couldn't?
But
Yeah.
from the very beginning, she
What's
didn't
that?
even know what she was trying to do, you
Yeah,
know. And so it's like there's part of that from a coaching perspective is tricking her into
yeah.
doing it so that she can create that feel and understand what it feels like so that she can recreate it. But also too, there's the perspective of you're trying to chase something that you don't even know what it
Mhm.
is at
Yeah,
times.
I was gonna say also pause for some context as well, as obviously we were there. Is that again one of the things that we'll use like pimping in the finish, for example, for that specifically is it's not about if you're somebody listening to it and going like, why would you try? You're trying to teach someone to pimp it. It's like no, it has nothing to do with the actual like show part of it. When it has to do with again all these things like you have to be stable, you have to be balance. You have to transfer force well. You have to. There's this famous clip of Bregman talking about that with his hitting coach that he's had since he was like 13, right? And he was talking to him like, "Yo, like I think it was like 2 off seasons ago or something like that," where he's talking to me. He's like, "I was working with hitting with another pro guy. I forgot who he was hitting with, but he's like, he said something like, you can't pimp the finish if you don't." Move really well. And so sometimes we'll use that as a drill, right? Where it's like, again, if a guy's going to pimp and also what type of pimp job, right? And we have to get into that even too now, just like trying to explain like what pimping, it is the type of pimp job is going to dictate your body to do something very specific. All it is a destination cue. Again, just like any other things, like when Trout steps over home plate, he's pimping it, right? It's just a destination cue that we're giving somebody to get back to that, right? And every hitter has certain things and how they deliver the barrel and like all these things where it's going to look a little different for different guys. And also too, again, to clarify, it has nothing to do with like, oh, let's see how good like you're doing it for show, right? You're trying to like embarrass like the person that you hit it off of or be really shows like no, it's literally a drill. Like it's a drill that we do specifically to get their body to move a different way. There's a similar drill you can do from the pitching side of things that we do as well, like also too, which is like like recoils and other things like that too that are super useful, which again have very similar concepts of like how we're training the body from the hitting side. But again, like wanted to bring that part up as well. With it.
Yeah, basically to give context, like her body was still moving too fast through contact where we were trying to get her to decel and get her barrel to capture that speed. And she can't pimp the finish or couldn't pimp the finish because her body was still rotating
not
too
stable.
fast after was unstable and couldn't stop her bat from moving, and she was over rotating, etc. And so it's a drill for that sense. And like you just said, like different interpretations, that gets even deeper. Like I would say like a pimp the finish to me is, I think of like you hit a ball and immediately like I can throw my bat down, like, but there's also like Cano hit a ball, it's like one hand finish, doesn't even look like he swung, like, there's different interpretations of even that too, if you know what, pimping the finish means. But overall too is just the idea of understanding where the hitter's head is at and their perception of what you're trying to get them to do has been a very huge overlying thing that has continued to just show up to me when it comes to the sessions. Like, hey, this is what I see, this is what I'm trying to get to happen, but I feel like we make those breakthroughs most of the time when we can connect the dots between where's the gap and what we're talking about right now. Like, again, I'm trying to get you to create length out front. You think you get it by a one-hand finish and reaching this way. I'm trying to get you to do it by decelling so my length isn't left and foul. And like we're trying to get the same thing.
You move based off the intention. Like, for example, if let's say if I'm like, hey, yeah, it's like it's like a star or it's like a tree or something like this, right? And I have this image in my head, right? And then I'm like, hey, I describe, like, yeah, like draw a tree, right? It's like, okay, if your kid draws a tree and like you draw a tree, you're going to draw different types of tree. Like you might draw a super tall one that's really bushy and has like another, you might draw a Christmas tree. You might draw like all these other things, right? And it's like, okay, but if I told you to go look for a tree, it's not specific enough, and also it's vague enough where someone might have some different interpretations of what I'm actually looking for and what my intention is. And like, for example, this is another way. It's like, again, the mind sees and goes after what it's looking for. You ever gone into the fridge looking for something specific, thinking that it was in an orange package and it was in a red? Yeah. And instead you looked right past what you were looking for because you're like, oh man, I thought it was red. Right? And so it's the same exact thing as well. It's like, hey, like, again, like obviously how the player interprets, right? And which is when people use the word, and we've talked about this a lot, but it's a good time to bring it up again, is like when people say the word intent is short for intention, right? Intent doesn't mean throw the ball or swing as hard as I can unless your intention is to throw the ball and swing as hard as I can. But if sometimes we're asking players, like, for example, what is your intent? Like, what is your intentions here? What are you trying to do? What is your goal right now? What is your focus? And then all of a sudden you'll hear them say, sometimes, also a little nugget for you as a coach, sometimes you give a player a cue, the next ball they hammer a ball, 2 swings later they hammer a ball, and then you go, hey, what were you thinking right there? Because this is why I've learned to ask that. Because you might think that they're doing your cue. But meanwhile, they changed it and came up with a whole nother thing and did something completely different. Or
it's like a template.
Or they just made it their own, right? Like you said, hey, I want you to try to, step over home plate with your left leg, after, right-handed hitter or whatever, after you hit the ball, right? Like a trot step. Okay, awesome. That player takes that and goes, oh, okay, well, the only way I can do that is I need to, like, hit the ball and hold the finish. So they changed the cue slightly, right? And go, okay, I got to hold it so that I can step. And so their main intention is, again, slightly switched. And then that way, later on, you keep cueing that same thing because you thought that was what they were trying to do. When in reality, it might be nothing of what they're trying to do. Or they might have thought when you said, hey, step over home plate, they might have thought, oh, like a breach. Oh, like a this, right? And they made this other connection that is unspoken, right? It's just what their brain did, right? When they heard you say what you said. And then they changed the cue. And then so that's why it's always important too, again, of obviously asking like, hey, like, what adjustment did you make there? And it sometimes it sounds very simplistic, right? It sounds like, why were you asking? You just told them to try to feel something, but it's like, yeah, it doesn't mean that they did, right? And also too, like, I say that to athletes all the time. It's like, yo, especially like 5-6 swings later, they probably made 3 adjustments already.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, on this next one, I'm gonna let it travel a little bit more. I'm gonna try to do this. I'm gonna try to drive it to right field. They might have, again, added some extra constraints that you didn't give them off the very beginning. Or maybe when you said that, right, when you said, hey, step over home plate, they're like, oh, I'm going to have to let the ball travel a lot more. And that was not even ever spoken out loud, right? So, like, having that other conversation is huge there as well. And then also, like we talked about, is like with their intentions, if, like, you don't know their intentions, right, and what they're trying to create, that's why I think it's also, from training a lot of athletes, it's a lot easier to start seeing their intentions. Like, for example, if you, as a coach, right, if you've been on a field, and we all know this, if the guy is trying to slap a ground ball to second base, that swing is very different than a guy that is intentionally trying to pull a home run. Now, it doesn't mean, right, and sometimes it's a little bit harder when they're like, it's a, they're trying to hit a double or a different situation or all those other things. But, or for example, or let me give you another big extreme. If I'm trying to sack bunt or hit a home run, my intention is different. So I'm going to create a different movement and I'm going to do something different. Now I'm still hitting a ball flying. I'm still going to hit my bat. I'm still going to direct it onto the field. There's obviously some overlap with a swing, right? And my goal might be here, right, is to, again, maybe I'm bunting for a hit. If I'm trying to bunt for a hit or even sack bunt, you can see the difference, right? How quickly I get out the box, how I set up in the box, what pitches I actually go after.
Right.
All of these things, the intention is going to change. That's why a coach would be like, again, you got 2 strikes and you're swinging out of your, butt, right? It's like, yo, like, your intention there is wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're trying to get too big on a count that is not your count or whatever, right? And a guy in scoring position, less than 2 outs, da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, it's the same thing that happens with, obviously, swings inside of a cage.
Yeah, and like those are extremes, but for like a tighter perspective is like, I want you to hit a line drive over the second baseman's head. Well, then you see him not rotate and push his hands.
Yeah.
When really we're like, no, let that thought influence how you move.
Yeah.
If a guy throws you a cookie and you pull a ball,
It's okay to pull it.
it's okay. Like
setting my eyes to right field.
Right.
It's okay if I pull it.
Whereas like you can see too, as you start to, give that cue more, see how it works and doesn't work. You can see the intentions. Like, was it a bad cue? No. Were their intentions different than how you meant it? Probably, right? It's like they think in that instance, well, no matter what, I just have to fillet a line drive over the second baseman's head, when that's not truly what you were trying to get them to do, right? And that's what, happened last week, where it's like, okay, like, I see what you're trying to do, but like, let it influence your move, not force it over the second baseman's head, right? And you told that story about like the knuckleballer, like, I want you to try to think about being able to drive it over the second baseman's head, hill line drive. But if he floats it and you pull it, so what? Like, let it eat. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, and I don't know the exact story. I know you were like telling me like, the details.
I've been trying to figure out as we were talking here, I've been on Urban Dictionary trying to figure out a way of describing pimping it. And so what I had to look up and what got me was like showing off, right? Because Urban Dictionary, obviously, there's different things. You have Urban Dictionary, and then you also have like baseball language, right? So it's like, that's a whole nother layer. It's like it needs its own dictionary.
That's a new app idea.
And so I was like, okay, well, it's like you're showing off, right? Like you hit a ball, right? And so one of the definitions on here, I thought it was good, is to appear, right? Or afterwards is skilled and assured in a way with the intention of impressing others. And so I think the same thing too as well. It's like you hit a ball, obviously, right? And again, I'm going over this more distinctly. Baseball guys are like, yeah, we get it, like pimping it. We know what it looks like every day. But like, again, you got to remember, like in softball, that is not normal.
Well, right? To your point right there with the little guys, bro, we got 10-year-olds that on their last swing of the day will pimp a ball. They're 10, right? And then we say to a softball girl, pimp it. And they're like, huh? it's just two completely different worlds when it comes to like that
Yeah.
mentality.
And then some people also take it as like boastful and all these
Right.
other things, which is like why a lot of old school guys are like against like, oh, we just put our head down and run. It's like, first off, have you seen Reggie Jackson? Like, first off, have you seen Bo Jackson?
Yeah.
First off, have you seen you can go all the way back to Babe Ruth. You can go back to a lot of guys, right? Where it's like, again, along with it, it's like, yo, this isn't a new thing.
No.
Right? Like, bro, I have clips from way back in the day, like again, on also too, and also too, in different generations, what showing off looks like is also different and also a lot of overlap, right? Like, again, like you got Reggie Jackson popping out the box, popping chains.
The Sosa shuffle.
Doing the shuffle. The Sosa shuffle was...
That was crazy. Boy,
right?
halfway down the line, shuffle.
Yeah, Tucker now will hit the ball, spin back, store the dugout, like all that stuff too as well. But it's like, again, how they can pimp it, right, is also based off of how they hit the ball. Like, for example, you'll do, you look at a guy like Tatis or something like that, right? Like, Tatis will hit a ball, stay in the box, tilt his head sideways, kind of get lazy with his body and like he gets like, did you see what I just did? Kind of like, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, I'm nasty, right? Like with it. And, again, it's obviously a big body language thing, right? And again, some people take it offensively, right? Don't be soft, right?
Yeah.
Throw a better pitch, right? Also, on the other end of that too, it happens in every single sport, right? Happens when guys dunk balls and they posterize guys. It happens when, and again, there's a time and a place, and you got to have some feel,
right?
You got to have some feel. Am I LeBron, right? Or am I a rookie in the league?
Hey.
There's certain things you can't get away with, right? And also too, no matter what, somebody's not going to like it, and also as well, right? Again, some people take it as well. It's like they don't ever do anything. Again, like one of my ways where people would say that this is the right thing to do. I was doing it as a way to pimp things. So what I would do is I'd hit a home run and I'd sprint the bases. I did it a lot, right? I'd hit the home run, put my head down immediately, knew it was gone immediately, dropped the bat, right? And I would sprint the bases like, I do this. Like in my head, that's what I'm thinking. Even though from my actions, it might not look, because I wasn't jumping in the air and doing whatever.
Yeah.
But like in my head, I'm like, yeah, this is what I do. You know what I'm saying? Like that was what was going on in my head. So it's like, again, I had a different way of expressing it a lot of the time. Right. And there was times that I was a little bit more, again, the same thing. I might bat flip. I might do other stuff or doing whatever. And again, there's all these things where there's some negative connotations like around it, but in reality, again, along with it, right, is I think it's also like a fun part of the game, right? Like, and that's where it's been more like as times have been changing, like, obviously some old heads have been upset about it, but again, there's people, it's not new. It's been happening for a really long time. It's human nature, along things with it. And also too, like, again, like, there's some, what would you say? Like some playfulness, like little kids like playing, in the park with some, playing wiffle ball. And then like people like act like you've been there before. And it's like, dude, again, this guy just hit a home run in the World Series to walk it off after he struck out 5 times. And the other thing, he may never be back here again. Act like he's been there before. Like he hasn't been.
And he's
before.
not going to be.
And he'll probably never be here again in his life. Right. Like, and again, like along with it, there's obviously lines. And like I said, you got to have some feel and all those other things as well. But again, that's not what we're doing it for in the cage, but to explain it. Right, to some people where, again, especially where I think when it goes into like softball specifically, I know we're getting off the main topic, but again, going back to that, right, is in softball, because it's seen as, so boastful or all these other things as well, and being like, in that term, in baseball, it's just obviously you get, like you said, there's 10-year-olds, there's 8-year-olds, I've seen videos online of 4-year-olds throwing the bat in the air, all that other stuff, right? Like they're watching what they see on TV. They're watching professional athletes, all these other things too. Some of the best in the world, every time they hit a home run, they pimp it or whatever. And again, usually the only time that things really get pimped is when it's a no doubt. home run, which I wonder why they could do it on those ones.
Yeah, I mean, also too, I think the pimping the ball side and more of like the mentality and like the viewpoint on it. Like also too, what's your intentions? Like, are you doing it to disrespect the other team, or are you doing it to fire up the boys or the girls in the dugout? Like, there's also too, like you hit a little double celly.
You
like
get your little
it's not
double
to
celebration.
show off towards the pitcher. It's to get your dugout involved and like fired up most of the time,
And
right? Not all the time,
and also
but
too, if you're as a competitor, if me celebrating on second base or pimping my single homer, whatever, is enough to get you rattled, you're also just
good.
you're just kind of a little soft.
Yeah,
Just
good.
a little soft. Like at the end of the day, like we're competing. Like also your emotions might be a little bit hurt because again, like people hit home runs off of me when I pitch. Like not many though, Code. Don't get it twisted, okay?
I get it a lot.
But with that being said, right? Like when I pitch, like also too when I played in, like people hit home runs off of us, right? And like again, like along with it, like I've seen the same thing too as well. Like again, like and also it's usually, especially nowadays, like there's not really a lot of players that take it personal.
No.
Part of the game, right?
No.
But again, to lay that intention, I just wanted to talk about that as well, is the reason I'm even bringing this up and going into a little bit more detailed is it's a really good drill. And if you have some emotional attachment to the opposite side of it being, oh, it's boastful and all these other things too, you're missing out on an opportunity for a really good drill that's really great for the CNS system. Dang it, I did it, Cody.
CNS system.
CNS.
Always good for one.
Gosh, always good for one. I caught it. Like as it was leaving my lips, I tried to grab it.
I didn't even catch it. I'm so used to you doing it by now.
It was as it was coming out of my mouth, and I was like, "What did you just say?" But again, along with it, right? Like you're missing out on an opportunity for a really good drill, right? And so when I bring this up too, is when we're talking about like these drills and we're talking about this stuff, right? Is again, a lot of things when we're talking about like firing patterns, when we're talking about again like coordinating the CNS, when we're talking about, because this is the thing you got to remember, in hundredths and thousands of a second, right? Just literally like what I was doing right now, right? How quickly your brain processes information, like all those other things. Literally right now, as I'm saying, CNS system, right? Like as it's sliding off my brain's already going, no, like it already caught it, right? And it's like forming the other thing. It's like when I'm hitting, and also too, you're training your brain. One of the things I think people undervalue is, as a baseball player, mental skill, completely detach it. Don't worry about baseball. You're having to make split-second decisions in thousandths of a second, right? Over and 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 over. You're training your brain to make very rapid decisions with very minimal information, right? There's a book called Blink. I don't know if you've ever read that book, but it talks about the same thing too, about like, making decisions in like, in a blink of a second, right? And so some of the things with that is like what that does to your brain. It also prepares you, right? To that skill transfers into other areas of your life as well. And I think that within sports, right, having to make rapid decisions, all these things, there's a lot of transfer over from like brain skills and things that you train your brain to do from sports, that obviously like reactions and like all these other things, being able to manage and have tools and develop tools to manage my emotions, to manage, all these other things, right? Because sports are really emotional, right? Like, for example, I go to my, 10-year-old nephew's baseball game and he strikes out and he's having he's crying in the dugout and he's doing other things, right? And he's learning skills of how to manage those emotions, right? Because one of my coaches, for example, is the same thing too. Like when I was younger and, I didn't play well, like, again, my identity was in the, even from a really young age, like my performance, all this other stuff. And I'd get really worked up. Like, and also too, I had some coaches that really took it a really bad way. And then I finally got a coach when I was like 13, Dan LaSalle. Still remember my man.
LaSalle.
Shout out to my dude. He was one of my first club ball coaches, and he just goes, he literally said to the team, like, I had a moment where like I got really fired up and I was mad that we lost or something like that. And he was just like, hey, like, he's like, he came and talked to me and he's like, Joey, like, you just care. You like, I'll take a kid that cares over someone that doesn't care. I have plenty of kids that don't care if they strike out, if we win or we don't win, or all those other things. Like, you just care. And some other people might look like they manage their emotions better, but it's because they don't care. Like you do care if we win or lose. Like you go home, like it upset you that we lost a doubleheader today, right? Or like it upset you, like all these other things, right? So like with that though, it gave me the freedom and also helped me start to learn how to manage and deal with those emotions and like how to deal with losses and how to deal with something I really wanted to happen. And like, okay, like, you know, with that, right. And all those, and like sports obviously has a great way of doing that, but there's a lot of transfer over. And again, this all comes back. Part of the CNS, right, is like when you think about like the brain and how it processes these things, right? Like, it's really important where now we're starting to value more the mental side of what's going on in the game. But like, for example, again, when you're in fight or flight, right, which is a major response, obviously, and we think about it like, oh, like, you know, a lion, there's some crazy scenario happening. Like, no, there's a ball flying at me at 90 miles an hour. Right. And it's very easily when I'm emotionally attached to this situation, all these things, that I get overwhelmed with. It's like, why don't I move like I do when I'm in the cage when there's also a ball flying at me at 90 miles an hour from a machine or whatever in a different environment, all these other things. Right. But now the environment's different. I got fans, I got a big field, I got defenders, I got, you know, public shame. I got all these other things that I might be attached to. And also too, we can start to realize too, everybody's experienced that one time in their life when they're doing a mundane task that they can do 999 times out of 1,000, right? But in this moment, they fumbled something, they dropped something, they did something, all these other things because they were emotionally overwhelmed. And again, when you get into fight or flight, right, your body goes into a state of your fine motor skills in fight or flight are not great, right? When you get into that moment, like think about it, like a lion's coming to kill you. It's not about painting this perfect little shade on this little fine tune. No. Big muscles get severely activated. Like you release a huge amounts of adrenaline. You have all of these overwhelming emotions and chemical, you know, experiences that are happening in your body, all these other things. Your body is going, we're either going to fight this lion or I'm going to run. I'm going to fight it or I'm going to run. Yeah. And so in that moment, it literally turns off parts of your brain so that you can survive, right? The problem is when championship game, all these other things, right? Like the new lion, right, is our brain in that fight or flight, the same response is, Kodee, you hit this ball to me a million times, same exact ball to me. I mean, I've hit balls, I've made errors, and I'm sure you have too. I've made errors on the easiest ground balls.
Most of the errors came from that.
Yeah, like most of my errors were on routine ground balls. And for me, it was more of a thing of, I know, and everyone on this field knows that I should field this ball right now. I felt more pressure on a routine ground ball than I did on a spectacular play.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? And this comes over to hitting, right? Another thing is coaching in the cage, and like you're talking about with intention and all those things, is you have to be able to be emotionally aware of your athlete and where they are. If they're emotionally overstimulated, right? Sometimes, like, and you see me do this with athletes, we won't even hit that day.
Yeah.
I go on a walk, we'll talk to them, do other things. But also, too, another part of that, they can get flustered. They can get upset when we talk about brain breaks, when we talk about all these other things, right? Is if they're getting emotionally too overwhelmed or they're getting too frustrated or they're failing too much, or for them, this is very frustrating because, again, maybe their mom died last year this exact day. And so he's emotionally on edge today. And so when he fails even twice today, all of a sudden he, goes, the straw that broke the, camel's back or whatever, right? And you're getting these big emotional responses. It's not that they can't do the skill. It's that part of their brain literally doesn't even operate very well. Yeah. Because it's the big, again, your big muscles, all these other things start getting turned on to do the bigger actions, which can really mess up something highly skilled, like hitting a ball moving through the air at 95 miles.
Yeah, and I think it's important too to note, like, there's some players that them coming up to hit in the 5th inning of a tournament game is a lion chase, like, because that's their brain. That's what makes them feel that way chemically.
And they've never experienced
No, like they're not
crazier things than
right.
that, right?
And
Like,
then too, you gain perspective, and you're
yes,
like, oh, it's just a game in the fifth inning, right? But to them,
for
right,
sure.
because like I don't know, maybe their brother was a big leaguer, and their
Yep.
dad's putting pressure on, or
Yep.
whatever. I don't know, just making up a
Whatever.
scenario. It's like so then they put this pressure on them. That's like
Yes.
if I don't get a hit here in the
Yes.
fifth inning, because my brother just showed
Yeah.
up and he's a minor leaguer right now, and like
Yeah,
he
yeah.
wants to see me get a hit. Immediately that
Yep.
happens to them. It's like. And then we try to downplay. It's like, bro, it's just a fifth inning. It's like,
Well, I was
well,
gonna
to
say,
him,
I was going to say, like,
bigger.
how many coaches, and this is where you need to be mindful too, because again, you need to deploy some empathy and also understand where you're at, is that at one point you were 10.
mm-hmm.
At one point, even if you were 10, you're like, yeah, but I wasn't like that. I want to say, okay, great. Your dad wasn't beating you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Situation,
You
right?
also, for example, even to this day, like one of my brothers, he got attacked by a dog when he was young.
Mm.
So when he gets around dogs, because of trauma and these other things, even though this happened, 30 years ago, right? He still slips into a place of like PTSD, fight or flight, all these other
Yeah.
things. And you got to understand along with this is where like educating yourself on like mental health and like all these things are really important, is that this isn't a conscious thing
Mm-hmm.
for most of your players, right? They don't even realize that
They
they're
don't even
doing
know.
it.
Yeah.
They don't even realize that they're going into a spiral, right? And so you as a coach, right? Again, that's what we call it. Like a lot of times we say swing therapy, a lot of that
Mhm.
stuff, right? Is understanding where they're at, right? And this is where you being centered and
Yeah.
healed and all those things.
Correct.
Because if you're in fight or flight and they're in fight or flight,
Right.
y'all interacting, how you communicate, how you're even thinking, all of that is going to be
Mhm.
manipulated, right? Because your brain is literally turning off. Like, for example, like your prefrontal cortex. When you're getting ate by a lion, right, and a lion's attacking you, we're not doing a math equation,
No.
right? That's not what your brain is putting resources
Mm-hmm.
to everything that it needs to survive. It's not worried about what's the best way, what's the most efficient way, what's all these other things. It's going right now. This is the most important thing. I need to survive this or get away from this threat,
Mm-hmm.
right? And again, sometimes we think about this only as a physical threat, but as you mentioned, sometimes it is again, underlying emotional,
Mhm.
spiritual, whatever, maybe physical, right? Maybe they're like,
Mhm.
if I don't hit well, like again, we've had players and I've coached players, athletes, stuff like that too as well. Like their family would physically beat them
Mm.
if they didn't, things didn't happen today, or they were worried about violent, or they, their dad was going to grab them and embarrass them in front of everybody or
Right.
whatever, right? Like these are real things that you get along with it. And also too, sometimes it's emotional, right? And for men, like you said, it gets downplayed a lot.
Yeah.
And it's like, yo, this kid knows that for the next 2 days in the car when he's with dad,
Yeah.
he's going to be getting belittled, devalued, all these other things in the car. And also, we could all recognize, we all remember, again, on the same side of that, like hopefully you didn't have parents that were like these other things, right? Is that we all, at one point, somebody, maybe it wasn't your parent, maybe it was your brother, maybe it was your uncle, maybe it was your coach, maybe it's whatever, right? And I think, in large, we've all played or knew a coach that the moment you made an error, or the moment you made a mistake, or you struck out in a big situation, or whatever that is, and it could have been your parents, it could have been again, somebody, somewhere, or you knew of a coach that did it, right? That made players feel that way, and also players that didn't want to play anymore because of somebody that
Mhm.
made them feel that way.
Right.
And that's the flight. I don't even want to be in that situation anymore.
Yeah. Go play.
I don't even want to play anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Because when I fail, I don't like how you make me feel or how I feel. And now I associate it with the sport
Mm-hmm.
rather than the person or the coach or whoever is making me feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And also, I haven't learned the tools, usually because I'm so young, right? And also don't have somebody helping me with these other tools, and haven't had a great coach to help me
Mm-hmm.
process some of these emotions where I can get out of that fight or flight. That's why, like, I could be wrong with the same thing. Like, when we do like breathing, like again, your deep breath resets, like all that
Mhm.
stuff, right? It's to try to get fight or flight to dissipate,
Mm.
right? To try to get that adrenaline dumps to dissipate, right? To get the parasympathetic nervous system and all those things, like trying to get my body back regulated,
Mm-hmm.
right? So focusing on my breath, all these little techniques that we think are like, oh, they're just silly, whatever. Like, no. This is how your body works,
Mm-hmm.
right? when there was a major, think about if there was like like again, let's say a lion attacked you, okay? You got away.
Mm-hmm.
You come in, we're sitting in the house. I'm going to be like, all right, Code, like, slow your breathing,
Yeah,
right?
box breathing.
Yes.
Think logical for a second.
Yes.
We escape. the
Navy
danger for a
SEALs
second.
use it.
Yeah.
It's not, this isn't some, do some breathing exercise, whatever. Like, the toughest guys you want to know in the world that go into this crazy, not the lion, but there's a guy sitting in there with an AR and he's like, with a grenade on his chest and doing whatever. These guys are doing breathing exercises, right? To get their brain back where it needs to be, right? So that they can perform on things that they've done a million times, right? But in this moment, right, I can't think clearly. I can't make great decisions.
Yeah.
I can't, and again, I'm going into a house about to pull a trigger, right, and clear this thing and save some people and do whatever, is I better be thinking clear and perform well underneath pressure, right? And how I process that and the tool sets and all the things that I have, that changes, again, highly, again, when we go into coordinating how we're coaching, picking up on your athlete, understanding what they need in this moment. Maybe we don't switch drills, not because I know that they couldn't do it, but because today they need to be a little bit more successful. Because there's some other things that I know that's going on in their life.
Right.
And there's a time to press and there's a time to let off.
Yeah.
But it gets substantially harder to do that when you're already in your own fight or flight and you feel like, oh, they're not getting the results. They're getting overwhelmed. They're doing other things. Blah, blah, blah. And again, I'm talking from experience of things, me developing as a coach, right? And like, again, the same thing. Fielding a routine ground ball, like these other things, right? Like it still goes on. And all of a sudden you stop playing baseball and all of a sudden you're in a different place. Like you're still developing and you're learning more tool sets and doing all those other things. And it's like the same thing too as well. It's like, a major part of being a really good coach is becoming the same thing, leader, period, right? Leader your family, all those other things is like, if you need to make decisions in really tough environments and all those other things, the only way you can do that is be really grounded, right? And have a lot of tool set, things built up and like know how to, dissipate some of these things, how to calm down quicker, how to, not get angry or upset or defensive or, deep the opposite way, right? Like men usually go into that other side, but also too like, I'm the worst, I suck, I'm terrible. Again, why do I talk about this, we talk about this with athletes too. It's like, they're like, I practice every day. How do I suck that bad? It's just like, okay, like chill out. Like
you don't.
You play for a Power 5 school. Like you're pretty damn good. You're one of the best players in the country, literally in the top 1% of the players in the country. You're really damn good. Right. You're just playing against really tough competition. The game's a lot faster. There's a lot more pressure, right? All these other things, right? And learning how to deal with these type of environments and all that stuff is
and I think too, just like it kind of goes back to the same thing. Like I made this comment in one of our evals last week. There's a younger softball girl came in, and I just asked her, I was like, "What is important to you?" And she was pretty like, confident. Like, I do this drill and I do this, and this is what I'm focused on. So I was like, okay, so what is important to you, right? And it's like, and then like the comment I made to her was, usually what you're trying to do, you're doing. Right? There's a reason behind what you're doing. You just may be missing what's happening downstream from what you're doing because you're so focused on what you're doing. And like, for example, it was like, I really want to drive my back foot and turn my back foot. And I'm like, okay, that's exactly what you're doing.
You are
actually. But you also told me that you struggle with basically pulling off, over rotating, and my barrel dragging. I'm like, in my opinion, what you're doing is downstream causing those things. But from a coaching perspective, in my opinion, if I didn't make that connection with her also too, she's 13 and we're like, trying to connect the dots for her in the conversation. It's like, if I didn't connect that dot with her, I don't know how much of that conversation would have really like resonated with her, And it's like, seeing their interpretation and their perception of the move or their task that they're trying to do is super, super important, because usually there's a reason, whether they know it or not, behind what's actually happening. And like I told her, it's like, you are doing what you say you're trying to do, actually, but
Yeah.
it's causing the things you don't want to do to happen.
Yeah.
You're just unaware of it
Yeah.
because you're a young hitter. You haven't experienced and failed and this
and
that.
and coaches, the same thing. When I'm coaching coaches,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times too as well, it's like something that they're trying to get not to happen is usually caused by something that they're trying to get to happen.
Right.
And it's one thing is causing another. And that's where, like, again, like as you go down that wisdom route, same thing too for me as well. Like when I'm doing the same process, I just do it with myself and like understanding. I was actually going to make this a post today because I thought that this was a pretty cool thing that I was reading the other day. Okay. So in the dynamic world, this is talking about marketing, but take the analogy. In the dynamic world of marketing, not every new trend guarantees success. It's vital to discern what aligns with foundational principles. True expertise lies in understanding when innovation complements rather than replaces tried and true.
Mm-hmm.
Jake learned that in a fast-paced realm of marketing, discernment is key. While embracing innovation is crucial, blindly following trends without considering their alignment with core principles can lead to pitfalls. With a newfound appreciation for the balance between the old and the new, Jake navigated his marketing journey with a more discerning eye. And the reasons I was like bringing that up as well is like hey, like that conceptualization, right, is that like learning. Like there's always going to be new things, all this other stuff. Like there's not a point that you get to where you're like, again, destination mindseted, where you're like fixed mindseted, where it's like, okay, I've learned what I need to know about, hitting or whatever, and I'm done, right? What I'm teaching the athlete, a way of thinking, a way of processing. I'm giving them tool sets to process how they're moving and why I'm making decisions the way that I am, all those things, and guiding them, right? It doesn't mean that I'm in a fixed mindset and they're in a growth mindset. No. I'm growing while they're growing. And while they're growing and I continue to grow, I keep an open to a lot of different things that may help, right? Like I have a filter, but also too, me and Steve were talking about this the other day. I have a filter, but my filter is also, I'm able to pick what I let in to change that filter of what I, again, we're going to let in or what we're not going to let in. Right. And, I kind of think of it like almost like, I was thinking about this, like I was watching too much Star Wars is, on, like Star Wars, right. Or you have like spaceship, right. Like they have like their shields up. Well, you have a shield, but you can also pick, you don't want nothing to get in, right? You want your other ships to get in, you want your other stuff, right? And so you're adapting that shield, right, of deflecting all the things you don't want to get in, right, that don't align, that could be detrimental, that could really hurt all those other things. And over time, the better your shield is, the better it is at protecting you from, one thing or another and like all that stuff. And so like almost thinking of it like it's like we think about it like another way of thinking about it is like, like a boundary, right? Like a boundary, think about it like a door, right? Like I can close the door, I can lock the door, I can open the door when I want, I can close the door when I want, I can let in what I want, I can not let in what I don't want. And also too, it's not a fixed barrier, it's not a wall, it's a door. I can, again, there is a way in and out of this, right? Where I can let people in, I can put them away, like all that stuff, like a physical boundary, also obviously emotional or whatever those boundaries might be too. And then like the same thing, with that there as well. It's like when you're going with thoughts from other people, it's like, you have a filter, you have a boundary, you have a shield, right? And you can filter in from those things. And also we're teaching them as well by being like, hey, it's not about knowing what I know or whatever, stand on my shoulders and all these other things. And I'm going to give you all of this stuff. But what I'm doing is teaching you a way of thinking, right? Of how to think for yourself, how to filter, a way of, again, becoming, this coach and all these other things, but also too, how you build the filter, how you build all those other things is from experience. And again, I'm helping you build your shield from the get-go, right? Rather than, if you just did it by yourself, again, you'd have to start from scratch. And that would be detrimental. You could either stand on generations and generations and generations and generations of tried and true, and what is tried and true from all of these people and all of the wisdom that's been gained over all of these years, Or I can just be like, you know what? Screw everybody's ideas. I'm starting from scratch. It's like, why would you want to do that? That's like saying like, that's like, well, I don't believe in cars, like, or whatever. I'll just build my own car.
Yeah.
And also too, I won't even use parts that are out there. I'm going to build all my own parts and I'm going to do everything for, it's just like, also, you know what? I think a car is a bad idea. I'm going to create a whatever. Like, it's just like you're starting from scratch,
Yeah.
like base level knowledge. Like instead of standing on the wisdom of what we've learned from like, you know, doctors and all these things over so many years and all that stuff, right? You just want to come up and start from scratch and go, no, everybody's wrong. I've created my own philosophy. It's like, why would you want to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's obviously wisdom from every,
Yeah.
like, again, like we talk about with hitters, like we send hitters out to other people to hit with. We also, on top of that as well, never like, again, there's hitting coaches like, don't look on social media. Those guys are idiots. Like, we allow players to bring us in.
Yeah. Come
Like,
question.
we tell them to, like, we'll even send them other stuff like, hey, like this, like you see how this, like this guy made this post, or like, hey, this is a really great thing. Like, I'd send that stuff out to our players and stuff too. You know, again, along with it, I'm like, hey, listen to this guy when it comes to like this concept. Like, I think that I really like how he talks about this. And I think this could be something that's very useful for you, a way of thinking some of these things that might really work for your, you know, like how you think or what you're struggling with right now or whatever. Or, you know, and again, maybe it's somebody like, it might be something with their faith. It might be something, it could be a whole bunch of things like in that same way. Maybe it's how they teach bat path. Maybe it's how they teach the lower body. Maybe it's how they do this, this and that, right? Like, with a lot of those things, like there could be a lot of transfer over or things like that as well. So like, that's the thing, right? Is like, and that's kind of like my expression or how the Bible explains like discernment, right? It's the same thing as well. It's like that shield or that ability. And right now, as that builds up, it's something over time, right? It's not something that in the very beginning, like you don't have very good discernment, right? Like when we're kids, we don't have very good discernment, right? We let everything in, right? Everything everybody says, everything, you know, like good and bad, you know, like again, like all advice, someone, you know, tells me this, I believe it, you know, it's just like, you're very, like all those things are very naive, of all that stuff. Like, you know, again, you could tell my niece, like, you know, Godzilla's in town and she'd be like, it's just like, you know, like they'll believe anything, right? Like very gullible on those other things, right? And like building that up, being able to filter those things is obviously very important, right? And so as a hitter, you got to be able to do that. It's not about being disrespectful or any of those other things. It's just like, again, like me knowing like what to let in and what not, and also a way of like, you know, thinking and filtering those thoughts and like how to organize that stuff as it happens.
Yeah. No, just like going back to the faith example. I mean, I think it's a really clear like relation to me when you think about it from like a faith and that filter standpoint. And then also too, I thought this was interesting. I haven't even told you this one yet. Was we went to church when I was back home for Christmas, and going back to kind of like your current situation and your interpretation. So I think of this like, you tell a kid to draw a tree that's from Vegas, he probably draws a palm tree. You tell a kid from where I'm from in the Midwest to draw a tree, they draw like a regular, you know, like
from what
green leaves and whatever, right? Whatever type of tree it is.
Yeah.
Right. And then you do one in Washington and they draw an evergreen tree. It's like 3 different trees. They're all trees, right? But based on their environment and what their understanding is.
Bro,
like,
don't be hating on the little tree next to you, right?
hey, this thing's IKEA branded.
Yeah,
you know, grown straight from IKEA soil.
Yep.
But
make sure to give that thing some water later, Nicole.
But I thought it was interesting was, you know, going to church out here, Church LV, and then also knowing what church was like growing up for me, and then went to church back in the Midwest in Omaha, and experiencing the Christmas service there and just how programmed it felt. And very like the church I go to here is like, God put in my heart, I ain't even going to talk about the message I talked about at 9 a.m. I'm going to talk about something different. And it's like in worship, you feel odd to not raise your hand here. And it's like, it's worship. Nobody's raising their hands. Everybody's kind of like looking around like, okay, bow your head, close your eyes. And it's like, you know, the message seemed very like, here's step 1, here's step 2. And it's like their interpretation of that and that filter is different for each one. And I'm like, it's super interesting to me seeing that. And I think about that from like a hitting perspective. It's like, I wouldn't have that perspective if I wouldn't have seen or listened or tried different things and different methods. So it's like, I'm never going to discourage it because that perspective has developed who I am as a man, as a coach, today, right? But also too, I go about it in a way where it's like I'm not just listening to everything like everything is gospel either. Like, when someone says something to me on TikTok and says the word God, I'm not like, this is true. I'm like, where in the Bible does it say that? Or like some hitting
And
coach
also,
says,
is that true to my personal
Right.
relationship with God too? Because
Right.
also too, for example, Bible says a lot of things.
Yeah.
Right. Also, you need to understand the context.
Yeah.
All those other things, and also too of understanding like what was the not only just context, but like what's the one, the spirit behind the law, right? Or the spirit behind
Right.
what was happening at the time. And like the same thing, and the reason I bring that up is the correlation over with where you were going with like as a hitting coach, right? Is they might take a line or something you've said or I've said or Nicole said or Steve said or Tewksbury said or, again, like whatever hitting coach, right? And they take that one line and it's like, and they think of it as gospel. And it's like, yeah, but like I might say the complete opposite to another here because you're not understanding the spirit, right? Or the context in which I was giving that message, right? You don't know who I'm talking to. You don't know why I gave them that cue. You don't know somebody this is going to make them push. Somebody this is going to make them free. Somebody is going to make them whatever. And it's like you go back to the Bible in that same way. Some of them, it's going to make them push them away from God. And some of them, it's going to draw them near. Because you need to understand the context, who is being spoken to, all these other things. And that's also why you get depths of information where like when you read the Bible, it's like kind of like a social media post, right? There's a letter that was written specifically to a certain audience, right? That their spirit behind it was trying to help them get closer to God or whatever that is. And the same thing, we're trying to help a hitter, right, get closer to where they're going and where they need to go. Some of them, like you said, sometimes we got to tell a hitter like, yo, hit a double, bro. Get some, like, do some damage, right? Like do some other things. Like you're being too passive, right? And then other times, maybe the same hitter, again, to the same church, Paul might say one thing, and then later on, he might have a whole other thing to, again, even the same church or a different church in the same area or whatever they were going on with at the time. And like understanding that all within context because there's wisdom. There's wisdom in every social media post that we're going to put out. But at the same time, you need to understand who it's being said to, who it's being applied to, why, all that stuff, and know that it could be the same hitter having the same problem, but tomorrow we might have a different method of how we would go about working with them or what we would go about doing with them.
It just came to me as like the album Elevation Worship. It's like you got Wait on the Lord and you also got Running. On the same album, it's like run.
Yeah.
Oh, wait on the Lord. It's like
or
two different things. It's like sometimes you need to be okay and obedient and patient with what you're doing now. Sometimes, bro, we're gonna sprint and
time to go.
Yeah, we're gonna sprint.
Yeah, and that's why I say like sometimes, for example, sometimes God calls you to stay. Sometimes He tells you to go.
And He's right both times.
Both and and they're both right. Right? It's just wisdom and knowing what to play and when. And then, like for example, there's times where we're going to tell someone to get forward, and there's times we're going to tell people to stay back.
Get back, yep.
And then and sometimes we're going to say, get back while you stay forward.
Yeah.
Or go forward while you stay back.
Yeah, real
right?
break right there.
Like all the things like in between that, right? And again, there's wisdom in all of that. But when you only see it in pieces and you don't understand the underlying mechanisms and the decision making and why what is being told, it just looks like random spurts of information, right? It's like that image like I pulled before where it's like, it looks like random dots all over the thing, right? And then it's like, okay, but then knowledge is like all of a sudden they're all in line, right? And then you got wisdom where it's like, okay, now they're all connected. And then you got like the story or like the thing, and that now it creates a shape, right? It's like, they're connected, but it also creates an image, right? And it's like, oh, and then as you get deeper in your knowledge, and then as you start learning more and more information, it creates different pictures, it creates different wisdom, it creates all these other things. And again, like wisdom from the other side of that, right, as well, is I was really in my, bro, I'll be using ChatGPT to unpack some stuff, like ideas, and like get my head wrapped around stuff. And so
You hear that, Tinky?
one of the things that let me see. Yeah, so one of the things I pulled as well is one of these stories. Okay. You ready for this? This is my story time. Story time on the farm. Podcast.
Here we go, Tinky.
Okay. In a vibrant city of Progressiveville, there was a renowned dojo where martial arts master Sensei Hiroshi trained his students. One student, Lily, had been studying diligently under Sensei Hiroshi for several years. As her skills improved, Lily started to feel confident, believing she was catching up to her wise teacher. One day, Sensei Hiroshi proposed a special challenge to test the students' progress. Lily, eager to prove herself, embraced the opportunity. As the challenge unfolded, Lily displayed her newly acquired techniques and skills, precision, confident that she had reached a level close to her teacher. Sensei Hiroshi, observing her performance, smiled and then effortlessly showcased a series of advanced techniques that left Lily in awe. Lily realized that despite her progress, Sensei Hiroshi was on an entirely different level. With humility, Lily approached Sensei Hiroshi and asked, "How do you stay so far ahead? I thought I was catching up." Sensei Hiroshi, with a gentle smile, responded, "In the journey of mastery, progress is not a linear race. It's a continuous spiral. While you've been climbing, I've been circling, learning, and refining my skills. True growth comes not just from catching up, but from embracing the infinite path of improvement." Lily understood that the perspective of progress is relative and that there's always more to learn and discover. The realization brought a newfound humility and appreciation for the depth of her teacher's wisdom. In that moment, Lily embraced the spiral of learning, recognizing that true mastery is a journey without a fixed destination.
Mm-hmm.
That's fire. But again, like with that, the reason I was like bringing these things up as well is like when you look at wisdom, it's like there's nowhere to get.
Mm.
You're trying to get linear somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where the master is constant and spiral, right? And mastery is constant and spiral. It's like, I don't think I've ever arrived when you're trying to arrive,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm just learning more.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking to more people, right? I'm going more in depth on certain subjects.
Mm-hmm.
I'm relearning something that I've already learned in the past. I'm reconnecting with old things that, that have happened previously. And also too, while you think you're catching up, there's nowhere to catch up to.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about, there isn't a race. It's where there's a journey that is happening, and that linear thought process is what's keeping you back from learning
Mm-hmm.
and mastering, is because you're trying to get somewhere.
Right.
There's nowhere to get,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where it's like I'm constantly just evolving and getting better. And also too, because I'm not in a race to get somewhere, I'm not passing vital information.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not missing opportunities because my eyes are too set in front of me trying to
Right.
get somewhere. Instead, if I need to stop today and look at this thing,
Mm-hmm.
I will. Tomorrow, I'm going to spend 10 minutes just circling this one idea, and an hour, 10 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
10 years, whatever, circling this one idea till I get to a deeper depth. It's like, that's what we're going to do, right? Like,
Right.
but again, along with that, it's like, and also too, I've already learned something. If I think I already know something, if I feel like I've already mastered something or whatever, there's no more point in learning.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think that you've arrived, destination, fixed mindset, that's when you stop becoming, you stop being seen. Also, you stop learning, like all that other stuff. You can't have a deeper depth of understanding when you think you already know, which is also biblically when Jesus was calling out the Pharisees and Sadducees and all these things. It's like you have so much pride
Mm-hmm.
because you think you have arrived.
Right.
You already know. That's why you won't learn.
Mm-hmm.
You need the biggest part of learning is you need to have the humility, right? You have the humility that is saying there's more to learn here,
Mm-hmm.
and there's more I could know,
Right.
right? And there's nowhere that I have arrived or gotten to where I'm on this constant learning journey, right? And it's not about a hierarchy of who's smarter or who's the master. And again, like also on, one of these other stories, I thought it was pretty good as well, is like the understanding too as well. It's like sometimes people, and we've seen this a lot too, is they'll go learn from another hitting coach or something, right? Let's say they hit with another hitting coach and they came to us.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go, oh, well, my other hitting coach didn't know anything. It's like, did they not know anything? Right? Or again, are you on a journey of learning more things? And also too, for example, you could hit with us for a week, month, a year, all those other things. It doesn't mean that, Colabello or, Tewksbury or Casey, Smith or, one of these other guys, like, that there's nothing that you couldn't learn from them, but understanding how all of those, the tried and true between all of that, like interconnects and like makes a real thing. And then also having the humility of not, again, replacing in totality, obviously the wisdom. Like you want to stack wisdom, not just keep replacing.
Right.
Because when you keep replacing philosophy, you're losing the previous wisdom. You want, again, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? It's like, like that old analogy. It's like, instead, like you take the wisdom from place to place and you stack them together and it creates one more full image, rather than every time oh, now I believe in this and now I believe in this. And no, like there's wisdom in everything.
Yeah.
Right. Every place I've learned, every guy I've learned underneath, every mentor I've had, all those other things, like there's wisdom everywhere they've been applied, like along with it. And I don't throw out the bathwater with it. I go back to things. I'm like, oh, that's why this worked. Like, I've pulled drills from like old school guys. I'm like, damn, that really worked. Like that was really good. And this is why it worked. Maybe we put a little twist on it. We do something a little different. And again, maybe we only do it with certain people. Right. But that's what we're always doing. And also too, that's why we're always learning, is because like there is no arrival.
Yeah.
Like we're just learning and growing. I'm not defending a hill. Like, hey, this is what we believe and why. This is my filter. This is my other things. But also with that being said, like there will forever be, I will die with not knowing everything there is to know about baseball swing, about humans, about all these other things. And it's a constant journey. And then one day you look up and you go, woo, like, all right, we've acquired quite a few things. And we've helped quite a few athletes. And we have quite a few methods and tools and ways that we can help people. But there's also more. There's also more depth. There's also better understanding. There's also all those other things. Like, and again, like there isn't no catching up. Right? It's just like stacking experiences and understanding and valuing everybody, right? Rather than having this hierarchy of, we're better or, all that stuff. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, again, at the end of the day, like, it's not up to you to decide you're better anyways. Like, your customer will. Like, like the people that come, your clients will, the relationships you have, the fruits that come out of like how you guys, manage work. And like, I think about this too. It's like how you're, we've gone through some topics today, but like, I was thinking about this like as well. One of the things I thought about the other day is from a different level. You know how you're like, we talk about your swing is like how you move is like an image of your brain. I was thinking about this as, my brain from business standpoint is how your business is an image of you. You know what I'm saying? Like how it's a mirror, right? Like how you operate, like how, your clients interact, how your culture that you have, all those other things, it's giving you feedback if you let it, right? Like, okay, this is why this operates this way. This is why these problems are happening. That's why this culture is acting this way. Is if coaches started thinking like that on your team, the reason your culture is the way that it is, and you can go, well, year over year, its culture is different every year. It's like, yeah, but you're also different every single year.
Right.
2, with that as well, who you're recruiting is a reflection of you. Also 3, how you handle those situations with those type of players is a reflection of you, right? Like how you get all of that to work together and like the person you are and the better leader you are, you can get large masses of people to be pulling in the same direction, right? And so like those are all reflections of like how the players love one another, how they care about one another, how they do this, how they do that. Like all of that overlaps, where if you're gaining awareness and you're more aware of where you sit and not in a hurry to get anywhere, but in a place of, I want to learn. I don't want to miss one learning lesson in this season of my life.
Right.
Right? Like, I'm not learning the lesson. That's why I'm running in circles.
Mm-hmm.
You keep trying to run fast, and all you're doing is running fast in a circle. It's just like, the faster you run in a circle, it's just like, yo, like, again, like, you're not learning the lesson, which is why, again, and I've been that area in my life many times, but also too, being okay. Like, God, if I got to run in a circle, like, let me run in a circle.
Yeah.
Like, till I get enough awareness that I'm running in a circle,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not learning, like, while I keep going in this spiritual circle over and over and over again. And that's why I'm still doing what I was doing 10 years ago, and responding the way I was 10 years ago, and doing blah, 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 whatever that is for anybody, or getting the same results with athletes I was 10 years ago. It's like, because we're not learning the lesson. We're just doing the same things over and over again with a fixed mindset and trying to do it faster.
Yeah.
Just get the same results over and over again fast.
Yeah. It's like, there's this funny family story. When my brother was learning how to drive at 16, my mom went around a roundabout like 3-4 times in a row, and he just followed her the whole way. It's like, but he's a new driver, doesn't know where he's going, never paid attention to the streets, doesn't know, like, he has no perspective or context, and he's just mindlessly driving around. And my mom's just laughing, because I was younger, so I'm like sitting in the passenger seat or back seat, whatever, just like watching my mom laugh, like, he's gonna follow me all day if I let him. Like, because he doesn't know any different. He doesn't know any better. It's like, you're not doing it to learn that I'm like where to go. You're not doing this and gaining any knowledge or perspective, like, that I'm messing with you right now by driving in circles around this roundabout. Like, you're just mindlessly doing what I'm doing and trying to follow. It's like, teaching how to think too, and that aspect of things, and how beneficial that is for athletes, of like, how to think, not what to think necessarily all the time. We kind of like to piggyback off what you were just saying too. It's like, it'll give you feedback. Like, obviously, like, before he got in to drive, like, there was no conversation, no understanding of like, where are we going? Where do you need to go? How do you need to do it? It's just, you're mindlessly following me. And like, that's what was created in that environment, was just a good soldier, basically, to him, not an independent thinker of like, I'll see you at the gas station. Like, I know the gas station's up here, and like, we're going to go, and sometimes I do that with some of our hitters, is I'll be like, what was wrong with that one? When it was a pretty good swing, pretty good move. And they'll be like, oh, this. And I'm like, nope. I was just like, you're just telling me what I want to hear right now. Like, you think there's something wrong, and that's what I told you last week. And I'm like,
think about that.
No, that's a pretty good move. And I was like, and that should be encouraging. It's like,
I was teaching somebody yesterday how to play spades. And we were playing spades, and then, like, as the cards came back around, I laid a card down, and I was like, all right, hold on, before we go, what does me laying down that card mean? Right? And like, progressively, like, as we taught the rules in the beginning, kind of some mindless following, like, okay, hey, this is what this means. I'm telling you all this stuff, right? And then you get to the point, it's like, again, like teaching, right? Like, okay, so if I laid this card, what do you think I have in my hand now? Why would I lay this card down in this situation, right? And then, like, continuing to progress that, right, too, as well. And then being like, okay, so like, what does your partner have in their hand? Like, what do you know what they have now? Like, and it's like, that's why I really like spades. If you never played spades before, it's such a thinking game, and you got to know and predict what other people have in their hand. And there's like, like elimination, and like the order the cards come out, why, and like why somebody would be doing that, what's the strategy behind it, how they like to play. Like, it's just such a mind side of it. But it's like the same thing as well, right? Like, again, like hitters, like all those things as well. It's like, okay, if they're doing something in a certain situation, like, well, again, like, if they're jumping out of their backside or doing whatever, again, like, it could be causing a whole bunch of things. So I'm looking at that going, okay, that's some ideas. I'm going to still ask them what their intention is and what their thought process was. But usually, again, a large part with that is like, and then also too, their body's going to adapt to what the demand and what they're asking their body to do. If they're asking their body to do something that is detrimental to them, their body's still, again, in context, are they going to survive? Yeah. Like, is it the most optimal way? Like, might not be, right? But again, along with that, right, it's like, as well, is there's things that their body, for example, I might have the intention of moving the right way. Maybe my body just can't do that. That's also true too as well. But in large, if I keep trying to do things over and over and over again, I start gaining those ranges of motion. I start training my body to do it. Like, if I can train my body to be able to pick up that much weight or do whatever. Again, if it's physically possible, and some of those other ways. But at the same time, you know, obviously how I go about that process is like all of it,
Yeah.
you know,
No,
mixed together.
funny you point that out. I just started playing on my phone a little bit in my
Spades.
free time. Was just Texas Hold'em poker.
Oh,
But and I've never played before, so I'm like 2
Yeah.
weeks in. So before anybody that's an expert comes in and tries
Yeah.
to say anything, but
Rudy
you know,
Garcia would be like,
yeah,
boy.
and it was like, you know nothing. It's like, yeah, you're right. But I thought it was funny is like as I started learning like what hands are good and like you know
Mhm.
what I can work with and like also to like you know just basic information with it, and I'm like playing this like on my phone just against a computer, like you can play online players and whatever. Is I think it's interesting is like when you start to think and come up with like your own strategy, and like you know we're just nerds and I'm like sitting there thinking about it like baseball
Mm.
is like the bluff and you know setting people up and all that
Mhm.
type of stuff. I'm like you know play very passively. I was like I fold a lot early on, like more my personality. I'm like I'm not like a huge risk taker, and it's like you know then I'm like all right, well I've been playing with the same group of people for you know 20 minutes on here. And I'm like, and I fold early a lot. I only put in money whenever I'm like got a really good hand. I was like, then there was one time I was like, you know, I'm not playing with real money. I'm playing with like, you know, the poker chips in the game or whatever. And I'm like, you know, I'm going to bet big right off the jump, even though I have a hand, because everybody here sees me folding and like they know I'm playing passive. And then everybody folds and I win. And I'm like, I had a pretty average hand. And I'm just like, it was so funny because I'm like, I'm thinking about it from a baseball perspective of just like, the little cat and mouse game and the strategy, and it's like, well, I know I got this, and this is a tool of mine, and you know I struggle with this, and blah 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 blah. As I'm just playing a little bit more cards and just learning how to do it, I just think it's again just interesting, like different approaches and styles and strategies to a game that we all play, you know. And it's like, you know, I don't know how many games of poker, you know, Hold'em you've ever played,
Not poker.
you know,
Yeah.
but you know, it's just like you'd have a different style, but it's the same game, and it's like, and then how you see the game is gonna like that interpretation is also gonna influence your
Your approach.
you know style and
Game
approach and strategy and this and that, and it's like this ever evolving like. You know, and then there's some days that I may play more aggressive, which is abnormal to my style or whatever. And it's just like, you know, it's just funny all the ties back when you do different stuff, and it's like, you know, being a nerd, I'm like, that applies to hitting. It's like, how can I, you know, a different way to communicate? Like I know some of our kids play cards, you know, maybe it's the Vegas in them, but you know, they play cards, and it's like that could be another way to connect with them. Or it's like, you know, I was like, you fight, and it's like that's another way to connect with them, you know. But yeah, no, just super interesting. It's like the thinking and the strategy behind it, and like again, how you view it is then to a similar task of hitting a ball, but your upbringing, your experience, your this, your that is going to influence how you tried to do it. You know, and that's why it's always fun. It's ever evolving and growing, and you know, always circling to go more in depth here and more in depth there, and learn more about this, and you know, grow here and better use this exercise here with this type of hitter. Blah 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 blah. So but yeah, no, that pretty much wraps it up. I know we went into a little bit of everything today.
A whole bunch of stuff. Yeah.
But,
a whole bunch of things. But all right, so I'll pray us out. All right. Dear Heavenly Father, God, we just ask you to remind us, God, of when we see your abundance, that we know that there's no way that we could ever come to a fixed idea or where we're at or we have arrived, because God, we can't live enough lifetimes to understand your abundance of knowledge and information and all the things that you're doing, that you continue to do, even wrap our minds around what you've already done, let alone what you're going to do and all those things. And just keep us humble, keep us open to new ideas, keep us open to the wisdom that you've shared with each one of us individually, and also the different ways that you're trying to teach us throughout experiences, through other people, through all of these different things. And God, we just ask that you do all these things in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, until next time, Farm System out.